वेलकम स्टूडेंट्स, हम डिस्कस कर रहे हैं दी सेकेंड न्यूमेरिकल फ्रॉम दी एक्सरसाइज फॉर द चैप्टर थर्मल प्रॉपर्टीज ऑफ मैटर, which is also the seventh chapter for 11th standard physics. So let's start. Now the question says, which will require more energy? First, heating a 2 kilogram block of lead by a factor of 30 Kelvin, or second, the heating a 4 kilogram block of copper by a factor of 5 Kelvin. Given is the specific heat of lead as 128 joule per kilogram per Kelvin, and then the specific heat of material copper as 387 joule per kilogram per Kelvin. क्वेश्चन डायग्राम के साथ समझते हैं फॉर अ लिटिल बिट मोर डेप्थ. सो जैसे कि आप देख सकते हैं हमारे पास दो ब्लॉक है. फर्स्ट ब्लॉक इज मेड अप ऑफ मटेरियल लेड एंड द सेकंड ब्लॉक इज मेड अप ऑफ मटेरियल कॉपर. एंड एज वी ऑल नो दैट दोनों के मासेस अलग है, बट हमारा जो टास्क है दैट इज टास्क वन इज टू हीट द लेड ब्लॉक सच दैट उसका टेम्परेचर राइजेस बाय अ फैक्टर ऑफ 30 केल्विन. एंड द सेकेंड टास्क इज टू हीट द कॉपर ब्लॉक सच दैट उसका टेम्परेचर राइजेस बाय अ फैक्टर ऑफ 5 केल्विन. एंड देन दोनों प्रोसेसेस में हमें ढूंढना है कि कौन से प्रोसेस के लिए ज़्यादा हीट लग रहा है. दैट इज आवर फाइनल टास्क. दैट इज व्हाट वी हैव टू कैलकुलेट. सो देख सकते हो प्रीटी स्ट्रेट फॉरवर्ड एंड ईजी क्वेश्चन है. सो लेट्स स्टार्ट बाय राइटिंग द गिवन डेटा जो हमें दिया है. सो द फर्स्ट स्टेप, जो फर्स्ट सेट ऑफ डेटा हमें दिया है दैट इज अबाउट द ब्लॉक लेड. सो द फर्स्ट क्वांटिटी हमें दिया है दैट इज द मास ऑफ लेड ब्लॉक. हम उन्हें ml से रिप्रेजेंट करेंगे एंड दिस इज सेड टू बी 2 kilograms. 2.0 and 2 kilograms are the same thing. And the second set of information about the lead block is कितने टेम्परेचर से उसका टेम्परेचर बढ़ाना है. So we have to increase the temperature of lead blocks by a difference. So delta TL is 30 Kelvin. So इस फैक्टर से टेम्परेचर बढ़ाना है. Second set of values is about the block of copper. So we know the mass of copper block MCU and this is said to be 4 kilograms. And then हमें ये भी पता है कि किस टेम्परेचर से जो है कॉपर ब्लॉक का टेम्परेचर रेज करना है. So we call it delta TCU. And we have to raise the temperature by a factor of 5 Kelvin here. And then हमारे पास कुछ specific heats है. So first specific heat is of the material lead, SL से represent करेंगे. So that is 128 joule per kilogram per Kelvin. And then we also know the specific heat for the material copper, SCU, and this is said to be 387 joule per kilogram per Kelvin. So you can see that copper का जो specific heat है that is significantly greater than the specific heat of lead. So let's see situation कैसा turn out होता है. Now we have to find, हमें पहले से पता है, हमसे पूछा है to find the substance or the block. We have to find the block which requires more heat to raise the temperature. Okay, its temperature. So that is what we have to find. Now let's try to understand what sort of formulas हम use कर सकते हैं to find this factor. So हमें पूछा है heat required calculate करने का. So as per our chapter, heat required, so Q का formula is given to us as mass into the specific heat into the change in temperature. So इस formula से जो है हमको heat required के बारे में पता चल जाता है and वही हमें ढूंढना भी है. And as you can see, mass, specific heat and change in temperature हमें already given है. So a simple substitution will give us the value of heat required to heat lead का block and also the heat required to heat the copper का block, and then we'll simply just compare them to say which is greater. So अब हमारा numerical जो है काफ़ी easy हो गया है. Our first step is now to calculate the heat required for lead block. So that is what we are calculating, heat required for lead block, and हम इसे कहेंगे as QL, and by the formula it is mass of lead into the specific heat of lead into the change in temperature or increase in temperature for our lead block. और ये तीनों values हमें available है Mass of lead is said to be 2 kilograms. Specific heat of lead is 128, and the temperature difference is 30. And if we were to multiply this, so 2 times 30 is 60, and 60 into 128 gives us 7680. So this is the amount of heat required to raise the temperature of lead block. And since हमने heat ढूंढा है, so इसका unit will be joules. So let me mark this as equation number 1. And now let's move on to calculate the second step of our solution. The second step is to calculate the heat required for copper block. Okay, so let me represent the heat required by the copper block as QCU, that is heat copper. And as per the formula, it should be the mass of copper, MCU, into the specific heat of copper into the temperature difference of copper. And in तीनों के values हमें हमारे given section में available है. So a simple substitution will give us the value of heat required. So copper का mass is 4, specific heat of copper is 387, and the rise in temperature for copper is 5 Kelvin. And if we were to perform the following multiplication, we get the answer as 7740 joules. So this is the heat required to raise the temperature of copper block. And let me mark this quantity as quantity number 2. So now from 1, so from our equation 1 and our equation 2, we can make a small observation. And that observation is that the heat required to raise the temperature of copper block is greater than the heat required to raise the temperature of lead. Because आप देख सकते हो कॉपर ब्लॉक को हीट करने के लिए हमें 7740 जूल्स एनर्जी लग रहा है, एंड लेड के लिए ओनली 7680 जूल्स लग रहा है. So heat required for raising the temperature of copper is greater than the heat required to raise the temperature of lead block. And so that's it. That is our answer. So our final answer is copper requires more heat. Copper requires more heat. So this was our final answer. With this, we are done. If you want the PDF of this small solution, make sure to check the description. Have a nice day.